I was 19 the night my mother set a wrapped Christmas present in front of me and told me to open it before I gave her my answer. Inside was a one-way bus ticket. "Give up the baby," she said, still smiling for the relatives down the table. "Or use the ticket. Your choice." I used the ticket. For 21 years, not one of them called. Not my mother. Not my father. Not my golden boy brother. Not when my son took his first step. Not when he walked across a graduation stage with my grandmother clapping in the front row. 21 years of nothing. Not a card, not a voicemail, not a single time anyone asked if we were alive. Then my grandmother died. She left me her house and $740,000. And the silence shattered like an ornament dropped on a hardwood floor. Suddenly I was family again. Suddenly there were calls. Then a lawyer. Then a courtroom. They walked in smirking, like the money already had their names carved into it. What happened in the next 10 minutes is the reason I'm telling you this. My name is Hazel. The night this started, I was a 19-year-old with a community college acceptance letter, a part-time job at a pharmacy, and a baby due in February. We were the kind of family that looked good in the Christmas photo. My father, Walter, ran a tile and stone business and liked to be called a self-made man at parties. My mother, Diane, ran the house, the church bake sale, and everyone's opinion of everyone else. And then there was my brother, Spencer, 2 years older, the golden one, the boy who could fail a class and somehow get praised for thinking outside the box. I was the quiet one, the useful one, the one who set the table and never argued. For 19 years I believed that if I just stayed easy enough, small enough, I'd be safe. Then I got pregnant. The boy involved vanished the same week the test came back positive, the way they do. And I made the mistake of thinking my family would catch me. I told them at Christmas dinner because I thought a house full of relatives would soften it. I thought my mother wouldn't make a scene in front of Aunt Pat. I was wrong about that, the way you can only be wrong about your own mother. There was one person at that table who didn't flinch. My grandmother, Vivian, my father's mother, 71 years old, sharp as a tack, sitting at the far end with a glass of sherry she barely touched. She'd raised 3 kids alone after her husband walked out in 1968, and she had a way of looking at a room and seeing exactly who was lying. She was watching my mother's face when I said the words, "I'm keeping it." But I had no idea how bad it was about to get. The table went quiet first. Then my mother smiled the smile she used for strangers. "Sweetheart," she said, "be reasonable. There are couples who wait years for a baby. We can make a call. No one here ever has to know." I said I wasn't giving him up. I said it twice, because the first time she pretended the kitchen timer had drowned me out. That's when she stood, walked to the sideboard, and brought back a small wrapped box with a silver bow. She set it in front of me like a place card. "Open it," she said, "before you decide anything." I peeled back the paper. Inside, on a bed of tissue, was a bus ticket, one way, to a city 400 miles away, where my mother had a cousin who took girls in your situation. "Give up the baby or use the ticket," she said. "You don't get to embarrass this family and live under our roof. Your choice." I looked at my father. Walter studied his plate like the gravy had personally insulted him. I looked at Spencer, 21, and grinning into his phone like he was watching a show. Nobody said a word. "Mom," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted. "I'm asking you to help me. I'm not asking you to raise him. I'm asking you not to throw me out." She didn't even blink. "I'm offering you a clean start," she said. "You'll thank me in 10 years. Girls who keep babies they can't afford ruin 2 lives instead of 1. You have to understand." I kept waiting for one of them to laugh and say it was a sick joke. They didn't. The relatives just stared at their napkins. Aunt Pat reached for the rolls like reaching for a life raft. My uncle suddenly needed to check the football score in the other room. The Christmas tree blinked behind my mother's shoulder, red and green, like nothing was happening. And the thing that still wakes me up some nights is how prepared she was. The ticket wasn't bought that afternoon. The date on it was 3 days out. She'd planned this. She'd wrapped it, sealed, put a silver bow on the worst thing she would ever do to me, and set it under the tree like a gift. I remember the cold most. Not outside, inside. The cold that comes off the people who are supposed to love you when they decide, all at once, that you cost too much. I stood up, my chair scraped, and from the far end of the table, my grandmother said one word, very calmly, Hazel. She wasn't telling me to sit down. She was telling me to come with her. Vivian got up, set her napkin beside her plate, and looked at my mother for a long, terrible moment. Then she said, You always did mistake cruelty for backbone, Diane. And to me, get your coat. You'll catch your death in this house. I learned something that night that took me 20 years to say out loud. The people who hand you a choice like that have already made theirs. The choice they offer you is just theater. My mother let me walk out into the snow. My grandmother drove me away in a rattling old Buick. And that night, in the passenger seat of that car, I made a decision that would change everything. The decision was simple, and it gutted me. I would never beg these people for anything again. But deciding that and surviving it are two different animals. I was 19, 7 weeks from a due date, with a duffel bag and $40. My grandmother had a tidy house and a fixed income and a heart condition she didn't that. Until later, she took me in without a single lecture. But I knew what I'd done to her. I'd put a war between her and her own son. The first months were the hardest of my life. I waited tables until my ankles swelled. I gave birth in February in a county hospital, with my grandmother holding one hand and a stranger, nurse holding the other. I named him Eli. And I want to tell you the cruelest part, the part I didn't understand until much later. It wasn't the ticket. It wasn't the silence at the table. It was that for the entire first year, I still checked the mailbox. Every single day, I told myself my mother would come around, that she'd see a photo of the baby and break, that somebody, my father, my brother, anybody, would knock on the door. No one ever came. There were nights I sat on my grandmother's bathroom floor at 3 a.m., with the baby monitor crackling, just so I wouldn't wake her with the sound of me crying. I felt invisible. I felt like a name they'd quietly erased from the family Bible. And then it got worse, because I found out they hadn't just gone quiet. They'd gone to work. A girl I'd gone to high school with called me, embarrassed, to tell me what my mother was saying at church, that I'd gotten myself into trouble and run off, that poor Diane had done everything right and had her heart broken by a wild daughter, that I'd abandoned the family. She had turned the story inside out so cleanly that, in our town, I was the villain and she was the saint who'd survived me. That was the second wound, and in some ways it cut deeper than the ticket, because it told me the truth. She hadn't thrown me out in a moment of anger she'd regret. She had built a whole story to live inside, and there was no room in it for me, or for my son. And then one night, rocking Eli back to sleep, I had the thought that changed me. I looked at his face, this person I'd bid, made out of nothing but refusal, and I realized no one was coming to save me. I had to save myself, and I had to do it so completely that one day their opinion of me would be worth nothing at all. So I built a life, quietly, methodically, brick by brick. My grandmother wouldn't let me wallow, and she wouldn't let me quit. She watched Eli at 2 a.m. so I could study. She made me re-enroll the semester I wanted to drop. You're not raising a son to watch his mother give up, she said. Now go. I transferred to the state school. I worked nights stocking shelves. I got into a paralegal program on loans and stubbornness, and from there into law school, and I crossed that stage with a 6-year-old clapping in the front row because his great-grandmother had taught him exactly when to cheer. Week by week, quietly, Methodically, I became a litigator, the kind who reads contracts for a living and reads people for free. I spent my career in courtrooms watching families tear each other apart over money, and I learned the single most useful lesson of my life. The law rewards the people who plan, and it punishes the people who grasp. My grandmother and I grew closer than I'd ever been with my own mother. Sunday dinners, holidays. She taught Eli to fish, and to balance a checkbook, and to never sign anything he hadn't read twice. And in all that time, 21 years, the family I was born into stayed silent. My mother never met her grandson. My father never asked. Spencer posted vacation photos I scrolled past and never liked. They had a version of me frozen at 19, a girl with a duffel bag and no prospects. They never updated the picture. They never once typed my name into a search bar, because looking would have meant admitting I existed. Then, last spring, my grandmother's heart finally gave out. She died in her own bed, holding my hand, with Eli asleep in the next room. A week after the funeral, which none of them attended, my phone started to ring. They had no idea what was coming. The first call was my brother. "Hey, stranger," Spencer said, like we'd just missed a couple of birthdays. Inside 90 seconds, he was asking about the house, the family property. "You know, we should all sit down." The second was my mother, crying expertly on the second syllable of my name. She talked about regret and short time and how Grandma would have wanted the family whole. She never asked my son's name. She never asked his age. She did, however, know the exact figure in the account. 740,000. Someone at the bank or the church had done the math for them. When I declined to sit down, the certified letter came. My parents and Spencer had hired a probate litigator and filed a contest of the trust. Their grounds were the two grounds these things always run on: that my grandmother lacked the mental capacity to sign, and that I had unduly influenced a vulnerable old woman to steer her fortune to myself. Here's the part they didn't know. Vivian had seen them coming 20 years away. She hadn't left a simple will. She'd built a living trust 4 years before she died, long before any doctor could be invented, to claim confusion. She'd used an independent attorney she chose herself. She'd gotten a letter from her physician, dated the same week she signed, attesting she was of completely sound mind. She'd had 2 witnesses who weren't family, her neighbor and her pharmacist. And she'd written a no-contest clause. Anyone who challenged the trust and lost would forfeit everything she'd left them and could be ordered to pay the cost of the fight. She'd left me a sealed letter with the lawyer, to be opened only if they filed. The last line read, "I didn't leave them out to be cruel, Hazel. I left them out so that if they came swinging, the only person they'd hurt was themselves." They came swinging. 2 weeks before the hearing, their lawyer sent a settlement offer, written in the soft, reasonable language of a man who'd been told the other side would be grateful for a way out. Hand over the house, split the 740,000 down the middle, and the family could begin to heal. He clearly been sold the same story everyone in town believed, that I was the cold daughter whose dealers taken advantage, and I'd jump at the chance to avoid a courtroom. I wrote back 4 sentences. I declined. I noted the trust was valid and would be defended. I observed that if the contest was pursued and lost, the no contest clause would trigger. I wished his clients well. I did not explain who I was. A settlement that hands a manipulator half of what they tried to steal isn't peace. It's a down payment on the next demand. I'd learned that lesson at 19, with my whole body. We met in a small probate courtroom 3 days before Christmas. My family filed in smirking. My mother in a good coat, my father in a too tight suit, Spencer in sunglasses he didn't take off indoors. They looked at me like I was a formality they'd come to watch crumble. Their lawyer walked in last, reading his file, and crossed to the table. Then he looked up, and he saw me. I watched his certainty die in real time, because I had stood across from this man a dozen times in a courthouse 2 hours away, and beaten him more often than not. He straightened, and out of pure reflex, he gave me a small nod and said the words that took the floor out from under my whole family. "Good morning, counselor." And then the room went completely silent. I watched the word travel across the aisle. My mother's smirk didn't vanish all at once. It slid, the way a painting slides when the nail gives. My father went gray. Spencer finally took off the sunglasses. They had walked in to defeat a girl from a Christmas table 20 years ago. They'd just learned, in front of God and the county, that she ran a litigation practice, and that the senile old woman they'd sued had built a fortress with her own 2 hands. Their lawyer leaned over and started explaining to them, low and urgent, that the ground had shifted. I didn't need to hear it. I've sat at enough tables to read a lawyer telling a client they're holding a losing hand. We didn't make a speech. We laid the trust before the court. The doctor's letter, dated the week she signed. The neighbor, who took the stand in her pressed good dress and testified that Vivian had done the crossword in pen that morning and beaten her at gin, and that no one on God's that too told that woman what to do with her own money. The pharmacist confirmed it, the independent attorney confirmed it, and my grandmother's own letter, read into the record in her own words, explaining in numbered points exactly why she'd built it the way she had. Through all of it, I never raised my voice. I never looked at my family. I folded my hands and let the paper do the work, because that was always the plan. They came with a story and a smirk. I came with a dead woman's signature, a doctor's certainty, and a neighbor who wouldn't lie. Stories lose to documents. They always have. And when the judge ruled, my mother came apart in open court. She stood before the bailiff could stop her, pointing at me, at the judge, at the room. "That old woman was confused," she shouted, "and this one took advantage. She always was a sneak. She ran off and left this family, and now she stands there, acting better than us." The more she screamed about being wronged, the smaller her case got, because a courtroom is the one venue on earth where volume is evidence of nothing. The judge upheld the trust in full. The house was mine. The money was mine. And because they're bums, and weathered without any reasonable basis against evidence they could have seen all along, the no contest clause held. The small bequests Vivian had left them vanished, and the court assessed part of the defense costs against them. They'd reached for everything and walked away owing. My mother caught me in the hallway after, the way she'd caught me at that table years ago. "We're still your family," she said. "Blood is blood." My son came to stand at my shoulder, 6 feet of the boy she'd never once asked about. And I watched her finally see him, and finally understand exactly what she'd put a silver bow on and handed away. "Family showed up 21 years ago," I said. "She's the one who drove me home in the snow. I keep the farmhouse now. Eli and I repainted the front door this fall. My parents don't call, and I've stopped flinching when the phone rings. Blood writes the names on a family tree. Loyalty decides which ones still mean anything. The woman who drove me out of the cold that Christmas night was the only mother that word was ever true about. Some people hand you a choice just to watch you break. I made mine. I just never made the one they wanted."